Welcome to the third of 5 mini lectures on William Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth. In this mini lecture, we're going to walk through the events of Act 3, looking carefully at character. In particular, we're going to look at Banquo. In many ways, Act 3 is his act. It's his personal tragedy. We'll get to that in a moment. And also, we're going to pay close attention to the way that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth trade places. And I've talked about that in the previous 2 mini lectures as well, and the way that we start to see cracks in Lady Macbeth's armor. Those cracks are going to become more and more apparent. Well, Macbeth is going to become more and more resolved as he heads down this road that he started. All right, so without further ado, the Act 3, Scene 1 starts with Banquo. I said it was his act. He gets the opening lines. And it's clear from the beginning of Act 3 that he is on to Macbeth. He knows that something is up. Follow along with me while I read. If you don't have your book open it up to Act 3, Scene 1, right at the beginning, line 1. Thou hast it now, King, Cawdor, Glamis, all as the weird women promised. The weird women meaning the three witches, the three sisters. And I fear thou playedst most foully for it. The repetition of that word foul. Remember that from the beginning. Fair is foul, foul is fair. Yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine. Why, by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope. Now, he's alone in this scene. He's not talking to Macbeth. If anything, most directors would have him talking directly to the audience here, and sort of letting them in on the inner workings, his inner thinking, his inner conflicts. He knows that Macbeth has played foully to become king. He indeed did. He murdered Duncan. But there's some truth in what the weird sister said, and if there's truth in it, then maybe there's some truth in the fact that he will be the root and father of future kings. Remember, he's got a son, Fleance. This suggests that maybe Fleance will become king. Banquo's thinking about all of this, and then Macbeth shows up. Macbeth comes in, and Macbeth here has a few questions. He's got a banquet, a banquet planned for this evening, and he wants to make sure Banquo's there, or at least he says he does. It's rather Banquo's going to be there, all right. We'll get to that in a moment here. Banquo is going to be there, but it's not quite the way Macbeth hoped for or planned at all. And he asks him some questions about what are you doing between now and supper time? What are you doing now between now and this banquet? And Banquo says, I'm going to go riding. And then Macbeth, he's very curious too about Fleance. Is Fleance going with you? Line 36, Macbeth says, hie you to horse, adieu, till you return at night. Goes Fleance with you? He wants to know where Fleance is. And Banquo says, yeah, hi, my good lord. Our time does call upon us. And he exits. And he says, Macbeth says, I wish your horses swift and sure of foot, and so I do commend you to their backs. Farewell. He wanted to know this information, though, because he is plotting to kill Banquo. And as soon as he leaves, he says so. He has a moment now where he speaks directly to the audience. Line 49, he says, and imagine Macbeth on stage talking directly to the audience. We heard Banquo talk directly to us a moment ago. Now it's Macbeth's turn. To be king, is nothing but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature. Skipping down Act 3, Scene 1, line 58. Follow along with me if you're not already. He chid the sisters when they first put the name of king upon me, and bade them speak to him. Then, prophet-like, they hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, fruitless meaning one that won't have children, won't have princes, won't have future kings, and put a barren scepter in my grip. Fruitless and barren, there's a nice repetition there of this idea of childless. Thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue means his children, have I filed my mind, have I defiled my mind, is how we would say that in the 21st century. For Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. For them, the gracious Duncan, have I murdered. I killed Duncan for Fleance's sake. That doesn't sit right with Macbeth. He wants to have his own sons, and he wants his sons to become king. So this idea of an unlineal hand, he wants things to go in a linear format from father to son, not unlineal where it jumps from one king to another family to another family. He wants that idea of a linear, and he knows that. He has this conversation with us, with the audience, and then two murderers walk on stage. And these two murderers, he's going to hire them to go into the woods tonight, find Banquo and Fleance while they are riding their horses, and to kill them. Jump down to line 115. Macbeth says to them, "Both of you know Banquo was your enemy." They answer, "True, my lord." Macbeth says, "So is he mine. And in such bloody distance that every minute of his being thrusts against my nearest of life. And though I could, with barefaced power, sweep him from my sight and bid my will avouch it, yet I must not. For certain friends that are both his and mine, whose loves I may not drop, but wail his fall, who I myself struck down. And thence it is that I to your assistance do make love. So I can't kill them myself, or I can't kill him myself in my name. I could, I'm king, but if I did that, I'd upset some of the other Thanes. We have friends in common. It would look bad. I can't. There would be anarchy if I did that. So I'm going to have you help me. To your assistance do make love, masking the business from the common eye for sundry weighty reasons. We have to keep this a secret. You're to go off and kill him." And they have no issue with this. The second murderer says, "We shall, my lord, perform what you command us." All right, so all of this is set. Act 3, Scene 2, the murderers have gone off to do their job. We'll see them again in a moment. But first, Lady Macbeth comes in, and this is where I was talking earlier. Lady Macbeth, her character is evolving over the course of the play. So is Macbeth's. These are dynamic characters. Their notion of right and wrong, their notion of what path they're treading on, and the morality involved in that keeps shifting. You'll remember early in the play, Macbeth was very hesitant to murder Duncan, but Lady Macbeth was resolved, and she urged him on. She questioned his manhood repeatedly. He did it. He killed Duncan in a large part because his wife pushed him to do so. Once the murder's done, his resolve grows. He becomes more resolved. He's king, and he will do what he needs to do to stay king. But Lady Macbeth starts to question herself, and she starts to question what they've done. All right, so they're having this conversation. Jump to Act 3, Scene 2, and go down to line 39. Follow along with me while I read. "Oh, this is Macbeth talking. Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. Thou knowest that Banquo and his Fleance lives." And Lady Macbeth is listening. He goes on, "There's comfort yet. They are assailable. I can assail them. I can kill them still. Then be thou jocund, be happy. Ere the bat hath flown his cloistered flight, ere to black Hecate summons the shard-born beetle with his drowsy hums hath rung night's yawning peal, there shall be done a deed of dreadful note." I've spoken before in class about how sometimes when it's difficult to read Shakespeare, we can look just at the beginnings and or endings of lines. This is a complicated one. There's a bit of poetry in here where he's talking about before the bat flies, before the beetle goes back to Hecate. We're going to meet Hecate soon too. Hecate's the goddess of witchcraft. We'll see her here in a moment. But really the meaning in that line is there's going to be done a deed of dreadful note right at the end of the line. Lady Macbeth, what's to be done, she says. And Macbeth doesn't tell her. He wants her to be innocent. He explicitly says, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed." So don't worry. I'm not going to tell you. Be innocent of the knowledge. And he's moved into this role now where he's the one taking control of the murders, taking control of the treachery. There's a shift, and we see Lady Macbeth. She doesn't have another line in the scene. She just sort of steps back and accepts this. We're gonna keep following that switch between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. All right, Act 3, Scene 3. These are all very short scenes. They read very quickly in Act 3. All of Macbeth moves very quickly. Act 3, Scene 3. We see the murderers again. Except this is one of the mysteries of the play, and there's not a right answer to this question. There's not a right answer to this issue. There's lots of ways you can deal with it as a reader thinking about it, and as a director as you're putting this on stage. There's a third murderer who shows up. Now back in Act 3, Scene 1, there were only two murderers. Now there's three. Some people, some scholars have said, well, maybe the third murderer is actually Macbeth. Maybe he himself has come along to make sure he's in disguise so that he's not recognized. Even the two murderers don't recognize him. Maybe it's him. Other people have suggested that maybe it's Lady Macbeth. Maybe she's the third murderer. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know if I find that one convincing. I don't know if I find either of those convincing, in fact. Other scholars have suggested there's a character we haven't met yet who's going to be around in Act 5 named Seyton. 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 We're going to meet him in a little bit. Some people think maybe this is Seyton. And in productions, you certainly could double the actor who plays Seyton later with this third murderer. But it's an interesting question, and it's one that doesn't have an answer. But it is an interesting question. Some directors answer the question simply by removing the third murderer. In Shakespeare performance, it's okay to cut lines. That almost all plays have lines cut from them when they're put on stage for performance. It's not okay to add lines. That's considered a bit. That's usually against the unwritten rules of directing Shakespeare or performing Shakespeare. You don't add lines, but you can cut them out and make it shorter. So some directors they cut this third murderer. They don't have him. They cut the lines that refer to him. This third murderer is along, and he is going to help in this murder. Now, as they go to commit the murder, though, they're successful. In terms of Banquo, they get Banquo, and Banquo is dead at the end of this. But this is line 23. Banquo says to Fleance, his last dying words are, "Oh, treachery, fly, good Fleance, fly, fly, fly." Fly means run away. "Thou mayest revenge, oh slave," and he calls the murderer a slave, and he dies with those lines. Lots of ways to do that. The line itself, just me reading it, that doesn't give it the magic. You've got to, as a director, as an actor, find some magic in the way that you do this. The Patrick Stewart version from a few years ago, they're on a train when the murder happens, so that can be it. It could be out in the forest. There's a dozen, 100 different possible ways to do this murder scene. A lot of it's left up to our creative imagination as readers to imagine it in our head, as actors, as directors to find a way to put it on the stage. Another, it's just like with the witches, lots of room for creativity. Act 3, Scene 4, is probably the most important scene of Act 3. Act 3, Scene 4 is the banquet. And you'll remember from Act 1, Scene 1, Macbeth told Banquo, "I want you there, I want you there, I want you at my banquet. Don't miss it." Of course, he knew that Banquo would miss it because he'd be dead. Turns out he's not going to miss it. Macbeth has witches, and the story of Macbeth, has ghosts. Banquo's ghost. So Banquo's ghost does indeed make it to the banquet. So we've got a big scene, and again, lots of room for creativity how you're going to do this banquet scene. The scene opens, though, with Macbeth and one of the banquet sort of just about to begin, and one of the murderers, the first murderer most likely, you'd have that actor do it. I suppose you could do it the second murderer, probably not the third murderer. He seems to disappear, he or she, depending on your take on that. Comes in, and Macbeth notices him, walks over to the corner of the stage to talk with him. I should say, or her. We could definitely have women playing the murderers too. Line 12, he says to the murderer, "There's blood upon thy face." And this is sort of in a stage whisper. The other folks on the stage don't hear or realize he's talking to the murderer, but he's got Banquo's blood on his face. So again, an implied stage direction. Shakespeare doesn't tell us exactly what this murderer should look like, how he should be dressed, but he should have some blood on his face for this line to make sense. So if you don't cut the line, you have to have some blood on his face to make it work. The murderer says, "'Tis Banquo's then." This pleases Macbeth. "'Tis better thee without than he within. I'd rather have his blood outside on you than inside of his body." And he asks the question, the important question, is he dispatched? Is he dead? "My lord, his throat is cut. That I did for him." But now, even more important, remember, it's not Banquo that Macbeth's worried about. It's the prophecy that said his sons would be king. His son, Fleance. Fleance, according to the witches, is going to at some point be king, or somewhere his line is going to be king. So if he's got Banquo dead, now if Fleance, Macbeth says, "Thou art the best of the cutthroats. Yet he's good that did the like for Fleance. If thou didst it, thou art the nonpareil. If you killed Fleance too, then you're perfect in my love." But bad news. Murderer reports, "My royal sir, Fleance, escaped." He is escaped. He is escaped. Fleance got away. And Macbeth, this is where he loses it. And he says his line, then comes my fit again. I had else been perfect. The prophecy still looks like it's a problem. It's still possible that Fleance, he's escaped. Now what happens? And this just eats away at Macbeth, and he doesn't know how to handle it. All right, so we return. The murderer exits. Macbeth comes back to the table, and he goes to sit in his chair, but his seat at the table is taken. And there's lots of different ways you can do this. Most theaters will have the actor wwho played Banquo also play the ghost. And he'll come back, he'll be scarred, he'll be mangled. They'll do some really fun stuff with his makeup, his costuming, and he'll be sitting in Macbeth's chair. So jump to this is Act 3, Scene 4, line 44. Follow along with me. Ross. Remember, Ross is that minor character. He's the one who told Macbeth he was Thane of Cawdor back in Act 1, and he's had these little small parts throughout. Well, here he is again at the banquet. He says, please it your highness to grace us with your royal company. Please, come, sit down. Macbeth looks, and he says, there's not a seat for me. The table's full. Now, the others at the banquet don't see him. They don't see that Banquo's ghost is sitting in Macbeth's chair. So Lennox says, here is a place reserved, and he points to what he thinks is an empty seat, but it's not. And Macbeth says, where? Here, my good lord. And then there's the in between that line, at the end of here's my good lord, period, but before the next sentence, Banquo stands up or turns around, however you want to direct this, but suddenly Macbeth sees that it's a ghost in his seat. Not just any ghost, it is the ghost of Banquo, the man he just murdered. And then Lennox sees that something's wrong. He doesn't know what it is. What is it that moves your highness? And Macbeth, for a moment, thinks somebody's done this. Somebody at the table has put a ghost there. His mind doesn't know. What would you do if you saw a ghost, right? I mean, how do you wrap your mind around it? You can't. Which of you has done this? What, my good lord? And then he looks right at Banquo, and he tries at first to plead innocence. He says, thou canst not say I did it. He's talking right to Banquo. You can't say I did it. I didn't murder you. I didn't do it. And then there's this line, another implied stage direction. Banquo shakes his head, and he's got locks of hair. He's got long hair, so his locks of hair move. And Macbeth's line, never shake thy gory locks at me. Don't shake your head at me. I didn't kill you. But he knows he did. And the guilt is eating him up. Now, there's a couple of different ways to read this ghost. Now, we can take the reading that simply there is a ghost. There's other supernatural elements in the story. We've got witches casting spells and making prophecies. Maybe there's ghosts too. Another possible reading is that this is all in Macbeth's mind. So it would be possible to do a stage version of this a little bit differently and just have it be an empty chair and just show Macbeth losing it at the thought of only him seeing the ghost. It's an interesting question to ask. Most directors choose to put a ghost on stage. I think the special effect, the idea, if you're trying to please an audience, it's much more interesting to see a play with a ghost in it than one with an empty chair in it. So I think that's the direction directors go. But there is the question of whether or not this ghost is real, or whether or not it's a manifestation of Macbeth's guilt, and whether he's not creating this ghost in his mind. In fact, Lady Macbeth is about to suggest that that's very much the case. The same thing with the dagger earlier. You'll remember we had earlier in the play a dagger that was floating in the air in front of Macbeth, and it's a question of, is there really some sort of ghostly dagger floating there, or is it simply Macbeth's wild and wicked imagination and that guilt culminating in him seeing things? Ross says, gentlemen, rise, his highness is not well. Lady Macbeth says, sit, and she tries to calm the situation. Remember, this isn't the first time that Macbeth has sort of gotten himself astray where people are watching and going, what on earth is going on? And Lady Macbeth tried to calm it down. She did that earlier in Act 2, and I talked about that in the previous mini lecture, where he went on, I killed the two watchmen, and I had to do it. What else would you do? Who can be wise and passionate, amazed in a moment speech? And he said, I had to do it. And she faints. She pretends to faint to take the heat off him. Here she's trying to do that again. She's like, these guys are going to see through us. You got to look like the innocent flower, buddy. He's not looking like an innocent flower right now. He looks like the serpent under it. And then she looks right at him and she's talking to him. This is probably a stage whisper. She goes back to that question of his manhood. This is line, about 58, I think, 57, 58. She says to him, are you a man? And Macbeth is defiant, aye, and a bold one, that dare look on that which might appall the devil. Yes, I'm a man, but I'm looking at a ghost. What would you do if you were looking at a ghost? Lady Macbeth says, oh, proper stuff. This is the very painting of your fear. And she's about to go, this is the same as when you told me about the dagger floating in the air. You're losing it. This is the air-drawn dagger which you said led you to Duncan. Oh, these flaws and starts, impostors to true fear, would well become a woman's story at a winter's fire, authorized by her grandam. It's like a woman talking at a fire, an old story that her grandmother told. You sound like a woman. And we see her again questioning his manhood, and that seems to work with Macbeth pretty well. Shame itself. Why do you make such faces? When all's done, you look but on a stool. But to Macbeth, it's not just a stool. He's looking, and he sees the ghost of Banquo. And he says, prithee, see there, behold, look. He's trying to get her to see it, but nobody but Macbeth sees this ghost, including Lady Macbeth doesn't see it either. And remember, she's innocent of the knowledge. She doesn't actually know for sure that Banquo is dead right now. We can argue she suspects it. I suppose if you take that theory that she was the third murderer, she knows. But most readings of it, she's still figuring out what the heck's going on. He says, behold, look, how say you? What, care I? And he says to the ghost, if thou canst nod, speak too, an implied stage direction. So when he asks those two questions, the ghost nods. He doesn't speak, but he nods. If thou canst nod, speak too. This reminds me a lot, if you've read Hamlet, of Hamlet talking to his father, the ghost, and Horatio earlier in Hamlet talking to the ghost. And at first, ghosts don't speak, and you have to coax them into talking. Banquo's ghost isn't actually ever going to speak. He says, if charnel houses and our graves must send those that we bury back, our monuments shall be the maws of heights. And Lady Macbeth is still trying to calm him down. At this point, the ghost exits. He's going to be back in a moment, but he exits. And she says, what, quite unmanned in folly? And again, she's always going back to this. Be a man, be a man. You've been unmanned in this. And Macbeth defends himself. If I stand here, I saw him. If you see me standing, I swear to gosh, I saw him. And she says, fie, for shame. And there's a great line, his response to this. This is line 76. Blood hath been shed ere now in the olden time, ere humane statute purged the gentle wheel. Aye, and since too, murders have been performed too terrible for. There's a lot of murderers and a lot of murders that have happened in the past. And it used to be that a guy would just die when you killed him. But that's not what happens anymore. Follow the line. And since too, murders have been performed too terrible for the ear. The time has been that when the brains were out, the man would die, and there an end. But now they rise again. So he's complaining here. There's a little bit of almost humorous irony, if we can step back from a moment from the horror that Macbeth is going through. There's a humorous irony in that he's complaining, if you kill a guy, he should stay dead. But no, that's not what happens. They come back and haunt you. All right, they settle back down. The ghost has exited for a moment. You can play that exit all sorts of different creative ways. You've got to get creative with the ghost when you're directing this. The ghost comes back. And all of a sudden, maybe by this time Macbeth is in his chair, perhaps, looking out, and all of a sudden the ghost steps back on stage, and he's right back into his fit. He says, avaunt, and quit my sight, let the earth hide thee. Thy bones are marrowless, thy blood is cold, thou hast no speculations in those eyes which thou dost glare with. He's yelling this at the ghost, terrified. Down to line 100. What man dare I dare? I would do anything a man would do. Approach thou like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the hurricane tiger. Come as a bear, a rhinoceros, a tiger, I'd fight you then. He says, take any shape but that, any shape but a ghost, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. I'm not scared of anything, but I'm scared of this. I'm scared of a ghost. Or be alive again, and dare me to the desert with thy sword. Be alive again. I'll fight you man to man, but I'm not going to. I can't. How am I supposed to fight with a ghost? What am I supposed to do? I fight with a bear, a rhinoceros, a tiger. I'd fight with you man to man. Or be alive again, and dare me to the desert with thy sword. If trembling I inhabit, then protest me the baby of a girl. Again, back to this idea of women being afraid, a very misogynistic approach. Lady Macbeth, too. Both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Hence, horrible shadow, unreal mockery, hence. And the ghost leaves at this point, having done his purpose of terrifying Macbeth. And he says, after the ghost is gone, he calms himself down, dusts himself off. He's okay. And he says, why so? Being gone, I am a man again. And he realizes, he sort of reinforces what Lady Macbeth said when she says he was unmanned. Now he's a man again. Jump to Act 3, Scene 5. Act 3, Scene 5 is an interesting scene in that there's a lot of scholars who make the case that Shakespeare didn't write this scene, that this scene was either added later or written by somebody else, and there's lots of reasons for them to think so. We won't get into that too much here, but we will take a look at the scene anyway, because it introduces an important character from myth, and that's Hecate. And an important character from myth that Shakespeare draws on in multiple plays, and also that he draws on in this particular play at least a couple of times. This is the only scene where we see Hecate, but there's references to her. So it's important to realize and to know Hecate is the goddess of witchcraft. She is the goddess that the weird sisters, the three witches, would answer to. She's their boss, right? And she's not very happy with them. This is the line 2, Act 3, Scene 5, line 2. We see the witches and they're meeting with Hecate, and Hecate says to them, "Have I not reason, bedlams as you are, saucy and overbold? How did you dare to trade and traffic with Macbeth in riddles and affairs of death?" And you can hear the rhythm in it. Sounds a little different than the rest of Macbeth. That's one reason people think it wasn't written by Shakespeare. There's a different rhythm. And she's upset because these ghosts have been giving prophecies without her saying to do so. She's the boss, right? And they've been talking to Macbeth, trade and traffic with Macbeth in riddles and affairs of death. She doesn't approve, but now that she's in on it, she's going to instruct them. We're going to do a little more. And she instructs them on, I won't go through the whole scene through her whole speech, but as she goes on, she's going to talk about how they're going to meet and they're going to do one more set of prophecies for Macbeth, and she's going to kind of take over the situation and give them instructions on how to finish this. Last scene, Act 3, Scene 6, before we finish up Act 3, is Lennox. He's another one of those minor lords, and then just a lord who doesn't get a name, so a relatively minor character. This scene reminds me a little bit of the one in Act 2 where Ross was talking with the old man. And this is Lennox and this lord that doesn't get a name, and they're talking just a little bit about this situation, what's going to happen and what's going on. And I think this scene is here. Shakespeare has these sorts of scenes where just sort of everyday people have a chance to talk and comment on the action of the play. This is one of the scenes, for example, there's no Macbeth, there's no Lady Macbeth, there's no Banquo. It's just sort of these two minor characters having a conversation. What on earth is going on? What did we just see? And there's a shift here. When it was Ross and the old man talking, the blame was placed on Malcolm and Donalbain. Now we're going to see that the idea of the everyday man is starting to see through Macbeth, and there's a shift in the blame. Let's jump down Act 3, Scene 6, line 24. Follow along with me while I read. "The son of Duncan, from whom this tyrant holds the due of birth," referring to Malcolm, "lives in the English court, who was received of the most pious Edward." King Edward was King of England at the time. Remember, we're in Scotland, not England. The play's written in England, but Macbeth's writing about Scotland. "Of the most pious Edward, with such grace that the malevolence of fortune nothing takes from his high respect. Thither Macduff is gone to pray the holy king upon his aid, to wake Northumberland and warlike Seward." So remember I said Macduff was an incredibly important character in the second half of the play. Malcolm already went to England, and now Macduff is going too. And they're going to go to and try to get Northumberland, warlike Seward, these other great English lords to come to Scotland and help put Malcolm on the throne. This is the first time where we see there is civil war brewing, and there is a rebellion rising up against the tyrant Macbeth. And the everyday people are aware of it, and they're starting to get ready to take sides. And as the play goes on and further, we see the sides that people choose to take. All right, now I mentioned a moment ago that Hecate and the three witches were planning to meet with Macbeth. Give a quick heads up. We're going to get to see that in Act 4, Scene 1, which is absolutely lovely. Act 4, Scene 1, we'll come back to that in the next mini lecture. All right, see you then.